My husband filed for divorce and demanded full custody of our daughter, claiming I was mentally unstable and dangerous. The judge was seconds away from signing the order that would ruin my life and strip me of everything I had built. Then my 8-year-old daughter Amara stood up from the back bench, holding her pink iPad, and asked, "May I show you something that Mom does not know about your honor?" The judge nodded slowly. When the video started playing on the courtroom monitors, the entire room froze in silence, including the husband who thought he had committed the perfect crime. I am Dominique, 38 years old, and until this morning, I was the CEO of a multi-million-dollar logistics firm based here in Atlanta. Now I am sitting in the defendant chair of the Fulton County Family Court, trying to remember how to form words. My tongue feels like it is made of lead, which is a side effect of the yellow pills my husband Kendrick insisted I take for my nerves this morning. He told me they were just strong vitamins to help me get through the stress of the trial, but as I watch him wipe a non-existent tear from his cheek, I realize they were designed to make me look exactly like this: lethargic, confused, and incapable of defending myself against his lies. Kendrick stands at the podium, his voice trembling with a practiced sorrow that makes me want to scream if I had the energy. He is telling Judge Vane that I have become a danger to our child, and that the stress of my business has turned me into an abusive alcoholic who throws wine bottles at him whenever he tries to help. Your Honor, I love my wife. Kendrick says, his hand resting on his heart, looking like the perfect grieving saint. But I cannot let our daughter Amara grow up in a war zone anymore. Dominique needs help, professional help, in a facility where she cannot hurt anyone, including herself. I grip the edges of the wooden table, my knuckles turning white beneath my dark skin. I want to stand up and shout that he is lying, that the only reason he wants me in a psychiatric facility is so he can gain power of attorney and sell my shipping containers and the port land I inherited from my father. But when I try to open my mouth, only a dry croak comes out. My lawyer looks at me with pity mixed with frustration. He nudges my elbow and whispers, "Pull yourself together, Dominique. You are looking guilty, and you are losing this case." I blink slowly, trying to focus on the blur that is my husband. He is wearing the navy blue suit I bought him for our anniversary last year. The same suit he wore to the charity gala where he first started telling our investors that I was having a breakdown. It is a masterclass in manipulation. He knows exactly which buttons to push to paint me as the angry and unstable woman, while he plays the patient and long-suffering husband who just wants to save his family. The court reporter types furiously, capturing every lie as if it were gospel truth. The air conditioner hums loudly, but it cannot drown out the sound of my life being dismantled brick by the man I promised to love forever. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had someone use your trust against you. Next, the bailiff called Jessica Miller to the stand. Jessica is Kendrick's sister-in-law, and the woman who has spent the last 6 months systematically dismantling my sanity within the walls of my own home. She walked to the witness stand wearing a soft pastel cardigan and a string of pearls, looking like the picture of suburban innocence. She glanced at me briefly with wide, fearful eyes before turning her attention to Judge Vane. It was a performance worthy of an Academy Award. I watched her wipe a non-existent tear from her cheek as she took the oath. Jessica knew exactly how to weaponize her fragility. In the eyes of the court, she was the concerned aunt stepping in to save a broken family. In reality, she was a vulture who had been picking at the carcass of my marriage since the day she moved into our guest suite. "Mrs. Miller, please tell the court what you witnessed on the night of October 12th. Kendrick's lawyer asked her gently, as if speaking to a traumatized child. Jessica took a shaky breath and gripped the railing of the witness box. "I was in the kitchen making tea. I heard shouting coming from the master bedroom. It was Dominique. She was screaming so loud I thought the windows would shatter. I ran upstairs because I was terrified for my brother-in-law. When I opened the door, I saw her holding a heavy glass vase. She looked primal. I tried to shake my head to signal that she was lying, but my neck felt stiff. The drugs Kendrick had given me were making my limbs feel like they weighed 1,000 pounds. I wanted to scream that I was not holding a vase. I was holding onto the dresser for support because Jessica had spiked my dinner with sedatives that night, but the words died in my throat. Jessica continued, her voice trembling just enough to sound credible. I am not a person who likes conflict, Your Honor. I tried to calm her down. I told her to think of Amara. But Dominique is just so naturally aggressive. You know how it is. She has this intimidation about her that makes you feel unsafe in your own home. I grabbed Kendrick and pulled him out of the room before she could throw it. I truly believe that if I had not been there, she would have killed him. The judge leaned forward, listening intently. I saw the shift in his eyes. He was buying it. He was buying the narrative of the angry, dangerous black woman terrorizing her gentle husband and his sweet, fragile sister-in-law. Jessica dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. I do not want to take Amara away from her mother. Your Honor, she sobbed softly. But I cannot stand by and watch that little girl be raised in such a volatile environment. Amara deserves a home where she is safe, where she can learn proper manners and be raised with traditional values. I am willing to take full custody of her along with Kendrick until Dominique gets the mental help she clearly needs. My blood boiled beneath the lethargy. Traditional values. I knew exactly what she meant. She meant whitewashing my daughter. She meant stripping Amara of her culture, her confidence, and her identity, just like she had tried to strip me of mine. I looked over at Amara sitting on the back bench. She was not looking at Jessica. She was staring at her iPad, her small fingers moving slightly. She was the only one in the room who knew the truth about Aunt Jessica. And I prayed to God that whatever she had on that screen would be enough to save us. Judge Vane adjusted his spectacles and looked down at me from his high bench. His expression was stern and unforgiving. I have heard enough, he announced, his deep voice filling the room. Based on the testimony provided by Mr. Brooks and Mrs. Miller, it is clear that the current environment is detrimental to the child's welfare. Therefore, I am inclined to grant temporary sole custody to the father pending a full psychiatric evaluation of the mother. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. I tried to stand up to shout that this was a mistake, but my legs would not cooperate. The sedatives were doing their job perfectly, keeping me silent while my life was stolen from me. Kendrick smirked, trying to hide his triumph behind a mask of solemn relief. Jessica reached out and squeezed his hand, a gesture of victory that made my stomach turn. The judge raised his gavel, ready to seal my fate. The sound of that wood striking the block would be the end of my world. Suddenly, a small scraping sound broke the heavy silence. It was the sound of a wooden bench shifting against the floor. Every head in the courtroom turned toward the back row. My daughter Amara stood there in her pressed Sunday dress, clutching her bright pink iPad against her chest like a shield. She looked so small in the vast, intimidating room, but her eyes were wide and focused. "Sit down, Amara." Kendrick hissed, his voice sharp and commanding. "This is not for children." But Amara did not sit down. She walked past the bailiff, who looked too surprised to stop her, and approached the railing that separated the gallery from the court floor. She looked directly up at the judge, her chin trembling slightly. "Excuse me, Mr. Judge," she said, her voice clear and bell-like, cutting through the tension. Judge Vane paused, his gavel hovering in midair. He looked down at my daughter, his expression softening just a fraction. "Yes, young lady. You should not be speaking right now." "I know," Amara replied, clutching the tablet tighter. "But my mommy cannot talk right now because Daddy gave her the yellow medicine. So I need to show you something instead." Kendrick's face went pale. He stood up abruptly, knocking his chair over. "Your Honor, I object. My daughter is confused. She is acting out because of the stress." "Sit down, Mr. Brooks." The judge barked, his authority snapping back instantly. "Let the child speak." He turned his attention back to Amara. "What do you want to show me, child?" Amara held up the pink iPad. "Can I show you my cartoon? I made it on my movie app. But it is not a normal cartoon. It is a movie about Daddy and Aunt Jessica." A heavy silence descended on the courtroom, a silence so thick it felt like it would suffocate us all. It was not the silence of peace, but the silence of a bomb about to detonate. Kendrick looked at Jessica, and for the first time I saw genuine terror in his eyes. Jessica had stopped her fake crying, her mouth hanging slightly open. The judge narrowed his eyes, sensing the shift in the atmosphere. "Bailiff, please take the device from the child and connect it to the main display." "No," Kendrick shouted, lunging forward. "You cannot do that. That is private property." Two court officers stepped in front of him, blocking his path. Kendrick fell back into his chair, defeated, beads of sweat forming on his forehead. As the bailiff took the iPad from Amara and plugged the connector cable into the court's audio-visual system, the large screens on the wall flickered to life. I held my breath, forcing my eyes to stay open. I did not know what my daughter had recorded, but as the screen turned from black to the familiar interior of my own kitchen, I knew that the game was about to change forever. To understand the horror on Kendrick's face, you have to go back 6 months. Back to a time when I was not a trembling woman in a defendant's chair, but the queen of the Atlanta shipping district. My life was a symphony of controlled chaos, and I was the conductor. I remember standing on the dock overlooking a sea of colorful shipping containers, listening to the mechanical hum of the cranes loading cargo onto a vessel bound for Singapore. I had built Brooks Logistics from a single truck into a multi-million-dollar empire. I commanded respect in an industry dominated by men, and I made no apologies for my success. Kendrick played the role of the supportive husband perfectly in public. He was a life coach, which was a fancy way of saying he spent his days posting motivational quotes on Instagram and spending my money on designer suits. On the surface, we were the power couple of the year. But looking back, I should have noticed the way his smile never reached his eyes when people congratulated me on my awards. I should have seen the simmering resentment of a man who felt small in the shadow of his wife's skyscraper. The turning point came on a rainy Tuesday in November. I was driving my Mercedes G-Wagon home from a late meeting. The car was a tank built for safety and reliability. I was navigating the winding roads of the Buckhead suburbs, thinking about Amara's upcoming piano recital. As I approached a sharp curve near the ravine, I tapped the brakes to slow down. The pedal went all the way to the floor. There was no resistance, no friction, just the terrifying weightlessness of a 2-ton metal beast hurtling out of control. I pumped the brakes frantically, panic seizing my chest. Nothing happened. The guardrail loomed closer in the headlights. I yanked the steering wheel, trying to drift into the embankment to stop the momentum, but the wet asphalt had other plans. The world spun violently as the car smashed through the barrier and rolled down the slope. The sound of crunching metal and shattering glass filled my ears before everything faded into a merciful blackness. When I woke up, the sterile smell of the hospital assaulted my senses. My left leg was encased in a heavy cast suspended in traction. The doctor told me I had shattered my tibial plateau and would need months of bed rest and rehabilitation. Kendrick was sitting by my bedside, holding my hand with tears streaming down his face. "Thank God you are alive, Dominique," he sobbed. "I do not know what I would do without you." At the time, I thought he was crying out of relief. I was so touched by his devotion that I ignored the police officer who came by later that afternoon. The officer mentioned that the preliminary inspection of the vehicle showed a clean severance of the brake line. "It looked like a cut, not a rupture," he said, frowning. But before I could ask what he meant, Kendrick ushered him out of the room, claiming I needed rest. He kissed my forehead and promised to take care of everything. And that is exactly what he did. He took care of everything, starting with my freedom. I returned to a home that suddenly felt less like a sanctuary and more like a prison. The doctors had discharged me with a strict regimen of painkillers and an even stricter order for bed rest. My leg was encased in a heavy plaster cast that felt like an anchor dragging me down. As Kendrick wheeled me into the foyer, I felt a wave of exhaustion wash over me. I looked at the vibrant oil painting hanging above the console table, a piece I had commissioned from a local Ghanaian artist. Its bold yellows and deep reds usually gave me energy, but today they just blurred together. Kendrick parked my wheelchair in the center of the living room and knelt beside me, holding my hands. "Babe, we need to talk about logistics," he said, his voice dripping with feigned concern. "I cannot run the house and take care of you and manage Amara all by myself. I am drowning here, Dominique." I tried to sit up straighter, ignoring the throbbing in my shin. "We can hire a nurse, Kendrick. We have the money." "No strangers," Kendrick insisted, shaking his head. "You need family. That is why I asked Marcus and Jessica to come stay with us for a while, just until you are back on your feet." Before I could protest, the front door swung open. Jessica walked in carrying 2 large suitcases, as if she were moving in permanently rather than visiting. She was followed by Marcus, Kendrick's brother, who looked apologetic but silent as always. Jessica did not even say hello. She dropped her bags and immediately started scanning the room, her eyes darting from my velvet emerald sofa to the abstract sculptures on the mantel. "Oh my goodness," she sighed, walking over to me and patting my head like I was a golden retriever. "You poor thing, no wonder you crashed that car. This house is so loud." I frowned. "What do you mean loud?" Jessica gestured vaguely at the room. "The colors, Dominique. The textures. It is all so overstimulating. How can you expect to heal in a place that is screaming for attention? It is very aggressive energy." "I love this house," I said, my voice weak but firm. "I designed the interior myself." "Well, that explains a lot," Jessica murmured under her breath. She turned to Kendrick with a bright professional smile. "Kendrick, if I am going to be taking care of things here, we need to make some changes. We need to embrace minimalism. Whites, beiges, clean lines. We need to strip all of this clutter away so Dominique's mind can rest. A chaotic home creates a chaotic mind." I felt a cold knot form in my stomach. She was not talking about cleaning up. She was talking about erasing me. My home was a reflection of my heritage and my success. Every artifact and every color told a story of where I came from. Jessica wanted to whitewash it all under the guise of medical necessity. I looked at Kendrick, expecting him to defend our home. He loved showing off this living room to his friends. But instead, he nodded slowly, looking at the room as if seeing it through Jessica's critical eyes for the first time. "She has a point, babe," Kendrick said, avoiding my gaze. "It is a bit much in here. Maybe we could store some of the art in the garage. Just for now. Just to make it easier for Jessica to keep things clean." I realized then that the accident had taken more than just my mobility. It had stripped away my authority. Jessica smiled a tight, victorious smile and began moving a stack of my architecture magazines off the coffee table, tossing them into a bin like trash. "We are going to fix this," she said. "By the time I am done, you won't even recognize this place." And she was right. I would not recognize my home, and soon I would barely recognize my own life. The first major battle of my confinement happened in the kitchen just 3 days after Jessica arrived. I was still confined to my wheelchair, but I had managed to wheel myself to the kitchen island. I craved comfort food, something to heal my body and my spirit. I had spent the morning carefully preparing my grandmother's recipe for gumbo. The rich aroma of rue, bell peppers, and spices filled the air, making the house feel like home again for the first time since the accident. I was just about to add the shrimp when Jessica breezed into the room, wrinkling her nose as if she had smelled a gas leak. "Oh, wow," she said, fanning the air in front of her face. "It is very pungent in here, Dominique. What on earth are you making?" "It is gumbo," I said, stirring the pot with pride. "My grandmother's recipe. It is exactly what I need right now." Jessica walked over to the stove and peered into the pot with a look of genuine concern. "Oh, honey, look at all that oil. And those spices." She shook her head sadly. "This is not good for inflammation. When you are healing from a major trauma, like a car crash, your body needs clean, simple fuel. Not this heavy soul food. It is just going to clog your arteries and slow down your recovery." Before I could stop her, she grabbed the handles of the heavy pot, using 2 oven mitts. What are you doing? I asked, my voice rising in panic. Put that down. I am helping you make better choices, Jessica said calmly. She walked to the sink, and before I could wheel myself around the island to stop her, she tipped the pot forward. I watched in horror as hours of work and generations of tradition were washed down the garbage disposal. The dark, rich broth swirled away, leaving only the smell of betrayal in the air. Are you crazy? I screamed, slamming my hand on the counter. That was my dinner. That was my comfort. Jessica did not flinch. She simply turned on the faucet to rinse the pot. I am making you some poached chicken and steamed zucchini instead. You will thank me later when your swelling goes down. I was shaking with rage, tears stinging my eyes. I reached for the phone to call Kendrick to tell him to get this woman out of my house. But Kendrick was already standing in the doorway. He had heard the shouting. Kendrick, tell her to leave, I demanded, pointing a trembling finger at Jessica. She just threw away my food. She has no right to touch my things. Kendrick looked at the empty pot in the sink and then at Jessica, who looked back at him with wide, innocent eyes. Kendrick, I was just trying to help her follow the anti-inflammatory diet the doctor recommended, she said softly. I spent all afternoon looking up healthy recipes for her. Kendrick sighed and walked over to me, but instead of comforting me, he looked disappointed. Dominique, stop overreacting. Jessica is doing us a huge favor by cooking and cleaning. You are being completely ungrateful. Ungrateful, I repeated in disbelief. She threw away my grandmother's gumbo, Kendrick. She is erasing everything that makes this house mine. She is trying to save your life. Kendrick snapped, his voice sharp. You are acting like a spoiled brat. Maybe if you stopped obsessing over food and focused on getting better, you would be out of that chair by now. Eat the chicken Jessica makes and say thank you. He turned and walked out, leaving me alone with Jessica. She smiled, a small, tight smile that did not reach her eyes. See, she whispered, setting a plate of boiled, unseasoned chicken in front of me. We just want what is best for you. Now eat up. Mrs. Hattie was the only light left in my rapidly darkening world. She had been with my family since before my parents passed away, and she was the only person in that house who looked at me with love instead of pity or contempt. While Jessica tried to starve me on boiled chicken and water, Mrs. Hattie would sneak into my room late at night with protein bars and whispered prayers. She was my lifeline, my connection to reality, and the only witness to the slow erasure of my existence, which is exactly why they had to get rid of her. The hammer dropped on a Friday morning. I was dozing in my wheelchair by the window when a piercing scream shattered the silence. It was Jessica. I heard heavy footsteps running up the stairs, followed by Kendrick shouting. My heart raced as the door flew open. Kendrick marched in, dragging a terrified-looking Mrs. Hattie by the arm, while Jessica followed behind, sobbing into a silk handkerchief. She stole it, Jessica wailed, pointing a manicured finger at the woman who had practically raised me. My diamond engagement ring, the one Marcus gave me. I left it on the bathroom sink and now it is gone. I looked at Mrs. Hattie. She stood tall and dignified despite Kendrick's grip on her arm. Her uniform was pressed perfectly, and her face was a mask of stoic calm, but I saw the fear in her eyes. I did not take anything, Mrs. Hattie said, her voice steady. I have worked in this house for 20 years, Mr. Kendrick. You know I am not a thief. We will see about that, Kendrick snapped. He grabbed Mrs. Hattie's worn leather handbag from her shoulder and dumped its contents onto my bed. A Bible, a roll of peppermint candies, some bus tokens, and there, gleaming maliciously against the white duvet, was Jessica's diamond ring. I gasped. It was a setup. It was so obviously a setup that I wanted to laugh at the absurdity of it. Mrs. Hattie would never be so careless as to steal a ring and put it in her bag while still in the house. Kendrick, this is ridiculous, I said, finding my voice. Jessica planted that. Mrs. Hattie has had access to my safe for a decade and never touched a penny. Dominique, please, Jessica cried, clinging to Kendrick's arm. I know you love her, but the evidence is right there. I do not feel safe with a thief in the house. What if she takes something of yours next? Or something of Amara's? That was the trigger. Kendrick's face hardened. He looked at Mrs. Hattie with cold indifference. Get your things and get out, Hattie. You are fired effective immediately. If you are not off the property in 10 minutes, I am calling the police and pressing charges. But Mr. Kendrick Hattie started to plead not for her job, but for me. She looked at me with desperate urgency. Who is going to watch out for Miss Dominique? Out! Kendrick roared, pointing at the door. Mrs. Hattie looked at me one last time. There were tears in her eyes now, but she nodded slowly, acknowledging that she had lost. As she turned to leave, she whispered loud enough for me to hear, "Watch your drink, baby girl. Watch your drink." And just like that, she was gone. The room fell silent save for Jessica's sniffles, which stopped almost instantly once Mrs. Hattie was out of sight. Jessica reached out and plucked her ring from the bed, sliding it back onto her finger. She looked at me, and for a split second the mask slipped. She smiled. A cold predator's smile. "Well, that is unfortunate," she said, smoothing her hair. "But do not worry, Dominique. I will take over her duties. I will be watching you very closely from now on." I shivered in the warm room. I was completely alone now, trapped in a house with two people who were plotting my demise, and I had just lost my only shield. With Mrs. Hattie gone, the silence in the house became deafening. But it was not a peaceful silence. It was a heavy, suffocating quiet that seemed to shift and breathe whenever I closed my eyes. The days began to bleed together into a gray haze of medication and isolation. That was when the strange things started happening. Small things at first. Things that made me question my own memory. I would place my phone on the nightstand before drifting off to a drug-induced sleep. When I woke up, it would be across the room on the vanity. I would ask for a glass of water, and 5 minutes later, Jessica would walk in empty-handed, claiming I never asked for anything. I started to feel like I was losing my grip on reality, which is exactly what they wanted. One afternoon, I woke up with a start. I vividly remembered leaving my laptop open on the bed because I had been trying to check my work emails in secret, but the bed was empty. I dragged myself upright, panic rising in my chest. "Kendrick!" I called out, my voice raspy. "Kendrick, where is my computer?" Kendrick appeared in the doorway almost instantly. "What are you talking about, Dominique? You do not have your computer. The doctor said no screens, remember. It overstimulates your brain." I shook my head violently. No, I had it. I was reading the quarterly report. I put it right there on the duvet. Jessica stepped into the room, standing just behind Kendrick like a shadow. "Oh, honey," she said with that pitying smile that made my skin crawl. "You must have been dreaming again. You have been asleep for 4 hours. There was no laptop." I looked from Kendrick to Jessica, trying to find a crack in their facade. But they were united, a wall of concern and condescension. "But it felt so real," I whispered. "That is the medication talking, babe," Kendrick said, walking over to smooth my hair. He picked up the bottle of yellow pills from the nightstand. "Dr. Evans said hallucinations are a rare side effect, but it looks like you are experiencing them. Maybe we need to up the dosage to help you sleep through it." "No," I said, pulling away. "I do not want more pills. I am not crazy, Kendrick." "Nobody said you were crazy," Jessica chimed in, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. "Just confused. Yesterday you thought you heard Amara crying in the basement, but Amara was at school. You are under a lot of stress, Dominique. You need to trust us to distinguish what is real and what is in your head." That night, as I lay in the dark fighting the heaviness of my eyelids, I heard it again, whispering. It was coming from the baby monitor that had been left in my room from when Amara was an infant. I strained my ears. It sounded like Kendrick's voice followed by Jessica's giggle. I tried to focus to catch the words, but the sounds seemed to warp and twist. Was it them planning my demise? Or was it just the wind? Was I actually losing my mind? I squeezed my eyes shut and dug my nails into my palms until they bled, just to feel something real. I had to stay sane. For Amara, I had to stay sane. But in that dark room with the walls closing in, I began to wonder if I had already lost the battle. The annual Port Authority Gala was the single most important event on my business calendar. It was where contracts were renewed and alliances were forged. Despite my shattered leg and the fog of medication clouding my brain, I refused to miss it. I spent 2 hours trying to apply makeup with trembling hands, determined to show the world that Dominique Brooks was still in charge. But when I wheeled myself into the living room, I felt my resolve crack. Jessica was standing by the door wearing a gold sequined gown that hugged her curves in all the right places. She looked radiant, healthy, and undeniably powerful. She looked like the woman I used to be. Kendrick stood beside her, adjusting his bow tie. When he saw me, his face fell into a mask of exaggerated concern. "Babe, are you sure about this?" he asked, walking over to smooth a stray hair from my forehead. "You look exhausted. Jessica and I can go represent the family. You should rest. I am the CEO, Kendrick." I said, my voice sharper than I intended. "I need to be there." "Fine," he sighed. "But no alcohol. You are on heavy painkillers." We arrived at the ballroom, and the noise immediately assaulted my senses. The lights seemed too bright, and the music too loud. Jessica wasted no time. She glided into the crowd, shaking hands with my biggest investors, laughing at their jokes and charming them with stories about how she was holding the family together during my tragic recovery. She was playing the role of the saintly sister-in-law perfectly, and I was the invalid burden trailing behind her. I spotted Mr. Henderson, my biggest client, standing near the bar. I needed to talk to him about the harbor expansion contract. I started to wheel myself toward him, but Kendrick intercepted me. "Here, babe," he said, handing me a crystal glass with a lime wedge. "Just a sparkling water. You look parched." I took the drink gratefully. The room was stifling hot. I took a long sip, trusting my husband to look out for me. That was my fatal mistake. Within 10 minutes, the room began to tilt. My vision blurred at the edges, and a wave of nausea rolled over me so violent it nearly knocked the breath from my lungs. I reached Mr. Henderson, but when I opened my mouth to greet him, my words came out in a thick, unintelligible slur. Mr. Henderson looked at me with confusion, then alarm. "Dominique, are you all right?" he asked, stepping back. I tried to say I am fine, but instead I lurched forward. The sparkling water had been spiked with a double dose of my sedatives, mixed with something else. Something that reacted violently with my system. I retched, and before I could cover my mouth, I vomited all over the front of my emerald silk gown and onto Mr. Henderson's polished shoes. The music stopped. The chatter died. I slumped forward in my wheelchair, gasping for air, tears of humiliation streaming down my face. Through the haze, I saw Kendrick rushing over his face, a portrait of long-suffering patience. "I am so sorry, everyone," he announced, his voice projecting to the back of the room. "My wife has a drinking problem that has gotten worse since the accident. We are trying to get her help." He looked at me with sad, disappointed eyes, while Jessica rushed to hand Mr. Henderson a napkin, apologizing profusely for my behavior. As they wheeled me out of the ballroom past the staring eyes of my peers, I knew my reputation was in ruins. Kendrick had not just embarrassed me. He had assassinated my character in front of the only people who could save my business. The morning after the gala, I woke up with a headache that felt like a sledgehammer was taking aim at my temples. The taste of bile and shame was thick in my throat. I tried to sit up, but the room spun violently, forcing me back against the pillows. Before I could even gather my thoughts, the bedroom door opened. Kendrick walked in carrying a silver tray. But instead of breakfast or coffee, it held a stack of legal documents and a heavy black Montblanc pen. He slammed the tray down on the nightstand, the noise echoing like a gunshot in the silent room. "Look at this," Kendrick said, tossing a tablet onto the duvet. I squinted at the screen. It was a video from the night before. I watched in horror as a shaky cell phone recording showed me slumping forward in my wheelchair, vomiting on Mr. Henderson's shoes, while the crowd gasped. The caption read, "CEO of Brooks Logistics meltdown at Charity Gala. You have destroyed us." Dominique Kendrick said, his voice cold and devoid of sympathy. The board has been calling me since 6 in the morning. Investors are pulling out. Mr. Henderson is threatening to cancel the harbor expansion contract. They think you are an unstable alcoholic who cannot be trusted with $1 billion supply chain. I felt tears sting my eyes. It was the medication, Kendrick, I whispered. You gave me that drink. Do not blame me for your lack of control, Kendrick snapped. He paced the room, running a hand over his shaved head. I managed to talk the board off a ledge. I told them you are entering a rehabilitation program immediately. But there is a condition. He tapped the stack of papers on the tray. You need to step down temporarily. You need to sign over the operational control of the company to me until you are deemed fit to return. It is a temporary power of attorney. I stared at the papers. My instincts screamed at me to refuse. Brooks Logistics was my life's work. My father built the foundation, but I built the skyscraper. Handing it over to Kendrick, who had never managed anything larger than a fantasy football league, felt like suicide. I cannot sign this, I said, my voice trembling. You do not know how to run the logistics network. And you do, Kendrick countered, pointing at the video on the tablet. Look at yourself, Dominique. You are a mess. If you do not sign this, the board will vote to remove you permanently for cause. You will lose the company anyway. At least this way it stays in the family. I am trying to save your legacy. Jessica appeared in the doorway, leaning against the frame with her arms crossed. He is right, Dominique, she said. Do it for Amara. Do you want her to see her mother bankrupt and humiliated? Or do you want to take some time to get better while Kendrick handles the stress? The mention of Amara broke me. I looked at my husband's face, searching for the man I married, but all I saw was a stranger in a suit. I was too weak to fight, too sick to think clearly. With a shaking hand, I picked up the pen. The tip scratched against the paper as I signed my name, sealing my fate. Kendrick snatched the papers away the moment the ink was dry. He checked the signature, and for the first time that morning he smiled. It was not a warm smile. It was the smile of a wolf that had finally cornered its prey. You did the right thing, babe, he said, sliding the documents into his briefcase. Now go back to sleep. You have a long recovery ahead of you. The erasure of my daughter did not happen all at once. It happened in agonizing little steps, starting with her crown. One afternoon I heard Amara crying in the bathroom. I dragged myself to the door, leaning heavily on my crutches. What I saw made my stomach turn. Jessica had Amara sitting on a stool in front of the vanity. The air was thick with the acrid smell of burnt hair. Jessica was pulling a steaming hot comb through Amara's beautiful natural curls, forcing them into submission until they hung limp and straight against her shoulders. Stop it! I rasped, my voice weak from the medication. You are hurting her. She loves her curls. Jessica did not even look at me. She just continued to pull the comb through Amara's hair with a grim determination. Beauty is pain, Dominique. You of all people should know that. Amara cannot go to the private school orientation looking like this. Her hair is unkempt. It looks wild and aggressive. We need to tame it so she looks presentable. So she looks civilized. Amara looked at me in the mirror, tears streaming down her face. Mommy, make her stop, she whimpered. It burns. I tried to step forward, but my leg gave out, and I stumbled against the doorframe. Jessica simply tutted and turned Amara's chair around. Now for the wardrobe. No more of those dreadful denim overalls. You are a little lady, Amara, not a construction worker. She pointed to a pile of clothes on the floor. It was a mountain of pink, scratchy tulle and lace. Dresses that looked like they belonged on a porcelain doll from the 1950s, not a vibrant 8-year-old girl who loved coding and soccer. I am not wearing that, Amara said, finding a sudden spark of defiance. I hate pink. I want my NASA shirt. You will wear what I tell you to wear. Jessica snapped, her voice losing its sugary coating. You are going to look like a proper young lady if it kills me. Your mother might have let you run around looking like a hoodlum, but that ends today. Put on the dress, Amara. No, Amara shouted, standing up and knocking the stool over. "You are not my mommy. You are just a mean lady who wants my daddy's money." The silence that followed was terrifying. Jessica's face went cold. She walked over to Amara and grabbed her by the upper arm, digging her long nails into my daughter's skin. "You need a timeout," Jessica said quietly. "A long one. To think about respect and gratitude." She dragged a kicking and screaming Amara down the hallway to the small guest room at the end of the corridor. She shoved my daughter inside and locked the door from the outside. "Let her out!" I screamed, pounding my fist against the wall. "You cannot lock her in there. It is the reflection room," Dominique, Jessica said calmly, pocketing the key. "She stays in there until she learns how to behave like a civilized human being. And if you try to open that door, I will tell Kendrick you attacked me again. And then he will have no choice but to send you away for good. Do you want to leave your daughter alone with me permanently?" I slumped to the floor defeated, listening to Amara's muffled sobs through the door. I had never felt so powerless in my life. Jessica was not just breaking my spirit, she was breaking my child's spirit, and I was too weak to stop her. My last hope arrived at 6 o'clock in the evening. Marcus walked through the front door looking tired from his job at the bank. He was Kendrick's older brother and Jessica's husband. For years I had known him as a gentle, soft-spoken man who loved barbecue and football. I thought that surely he would see the insanity of what was happening in my house. I thought he would be the voice of reason that would save us. I was wrong. "Marcus." I cried out, wheeling myself toward him as fast as my arms could manage. "You have to help me. Jessica has locked Amara in the guest room. She has been in there for 3 hours without food or water. Please, Marcus, make her unlock the door." Marcus stopped and looked at me. Then he looked at Jessica, who was sitting on the sofa, calmly sipping a glass of wine. He did not look angry at his wife. He looked weary. He looked like a man who had been told a story 1,000 times and had finally accepted it as truth. Jessica set her wine glass down and stood up, walking over to her husband to straighten his tie. She lowered her voice to a conspiratorial whisper, but I could hear every word. "See what I mean, Marcus? She has been frantic like this all day, creating drama where there is none. Amara is just in a time-out because she threw a tantrum. We are trying to instill some discipline." Marcus looked at me, and for the first time I saw fear in his eyes. Not fear for me, but fear of me. Jessica had done her work well. She had convinced him that I was a ticking time bomb. Dominique, Marcus said slowly, stepping back as I approached. "Maybe you should listen to Jessica. She raised 3 of her younger sisters. She knows about children. You have been different lately." "Different," I choked out. "Marcus, they are drugging me. They fired Mrs. Hattie. They are taking over my house. How can you not see this?" Marcus shook his head sadly. "I saw the video from the gala, Dominique. I saw you drunk and screaming at your investors. That is not the woman I know." Kendrick showed me the doctor's report. "He says you are having a psychotic break triggered by the trauma of the accident. We just want you to get better." I stared at him in horror. The betrayal cut deeper than any knife. Marcus was a smart man, but he was weak. He was so terrified of conflict with his domineering wife that he chose the path of least resistance. He chose to believe the lie because the truth was too inconvenient to handle. "Please, Marcus," I begged, tears streaming down my face. "Just open the door. Just let me see my daughter." Jessica stepped between us, placing a hand on Marcus's chest. "Go upstairs and shower, honey. I will handle this. Dominique is just having another episode." Marcus looked at me one last time, then looked at the floor. "Listen to Jessica," he mumbled. "She is only trying to help." Then he turned and walked up the stairs, leaving me alone with the woman who had stolen his spine and was now stealing my life. As I watched him go, I realized that there was no one coming to save me. The cavalry was not coming. If I wanted to survive this, I was going to have to save myself. But first, I had to survive the night. The master suite became my entire world. It was a gilded cage with 4 walls of silk wallpaper and windows that looked out onto a life I used to lead. Kendrick had confiscated my phone the morning after Marcus visited. He claimed it was strictly for my mental hygiene. No emails, no news, no social media. He said the blue light was triggering my episodes, but I knew the truth. He was cutting off my tongue so I could not scream for help. Jessica did not just act as my nurse, she began to audition for the role of my replacement. It started subtly, but soon became a blatant display of dominance. One afternoon, she walked into my room, carrying a tray of lukewarm soup. My breath caught in my throat. She was wearing my vintage silk kimono, the hand-painted robe I had bought in Kyoto on a business trip. It was a piece I cherished, a symbol of my independence and success. And she was wearing it, as if it were a cheap bathrobe from a discount store. "That is mine," I whispered, my voice raspy from disuse. "Take it off, Jessica." "Oh, this old thing," she said, looking down at the silk and smoothing it over her hips. "I just threw it on because I spilled coffee on my blouse." "Do not be so possessive, Dominique. It fits me better anyway. You have lost so much weight lately, you would just swim in it." She set the tray down and walked over to my vanity table. It was covered in my perfumes, my jewelry, and my expensive skincare products. Jessica sat down on my velvet stool and began to idly play with a bottle of my Chanel No. 5. "I have been handling the household accounts," she said, spraying a cloud of my signature scent into the air. "You would be shocked at how much money you are wasting on staff. I fired the landscapers and the pool boy. Kendrick and I agreed that we need to tighten the budget if we are going to weather this storm." "You fired them," I choked out. "Those men have families. I have employed them for years." "They were overcharging you," Jessica replied, checking her reflection in my mirror. She applied a layer of my lipstick, pursing her lips. "Besides, we need privacy right now. We do not need strangers wandering around the property seeing you in this state." She stood up and twirled around the silk kimono, flaring out. I closed my eyes, unable to watch her parade around in my skin. She was erasing my presence in my own home. She was making decisions, spending my money, and wearing my clothes. She was the lady of the house now, and I was just the embarrassing secret locked away upstairs. "Eat your soup, Dominique," she said, walking toward the door. "I have a dinner party to plan." Kendrick invited some of his friends over to celebrate his new business venture. "It is a shame you cannot join us, but do not worry. I will be the perfect hostess in your place." The door clicked shut, and the sound of the lock turning was the loudest noise in the room. I was a prisoner in the empire I had built, and my jailer was wearing my clothes. They stopped lowering their voices around the 3rd week. That was when I realized I had officially ceased to be a person in their eyes. I had become furniture, a piece of inventory in the house they were already mentally liquidating. The ultimate insult came on a Tuesday afternoon, when Kendrick and Jessica walked into my bedroom carrying a roll of large blueprints and a bottle of expensive champagne. They did not even look at my face. Instead, Kendrick cleared the magazines off the foot of my bed and unrolled the blueprints right over my paralyzed legs, using my cast as a paperweight. "Look at this," Kendrick said, tracing a line on the map with his finger. "This is the prime sector, the Southside Harbor land. Dominique has been sitting on this for 5 years, refusing to develop it because it was her father's legacy. But the developers from Miami do not care about legacy. They care about deep water access." Jessica leaned over the map, her hip brushing against my shoulder as if I were a bolster pillow. "And you are sure we can sell it without her signature?" she asked, taking a sip of champagne. Kendrick tapped the breast pocket of his jacket. "I have the power of attorney, Jessica. As long as Dr. Evans certifies that she is incapacitated, I can liquidate any asset I want to pay for her medical care. And let us be honest. Her medical care is going to be very expensive in that private facility in Switzerland." I lay there listening to my husband sell my birthright. The Southside Harbor land was not just dirt and water. It was the first piece of property my father ever bought. He had worked double shifts at the docks for 20 years to afford that plot. He told me it was the anchor of our family, And now Kendrick was planning to trade it for a quick cash infusion to fund his lifestyle with his brother's wife. How much are they offering? Jessica asked, her eyes gleaming with greed. 20 million, Kendrick said, grinning. Cash. We can close the deal by the end of the month. Once the money hits the offshore account, we are set. We can finally start that luxury lifestyle brand we talked about. 20 million. I wanted to laugh. I wanted to sit up and tell them that they were idiots, that land had been appraised at 60 million just last year because of the new trade route expansion. They were selling my legacy for pennies on the dollar because they were too stupid to understand the market. But I bit the inside of my cheek until I tasted copper. I kept my breathing shallow and my eyes half closed. Jessica looked down at me then. She waved a hand in front of my face like she was shooing a fly. Look at her, she sneered. She does not understand a word we are saying. The great CEO, Dominique Brooks. Now look at her, drooling on her pillow while the adults do business. She is gone, Kendrick said, dismissing me with a shrug. The Dominique we knew is not coming back. We are doing her a favor, really. She would not want to burden us. He poured another glass of champagne, and they clinked glasses right over my body. To new beginnings, Jessica said. To new beginnings, Kendrick echoed. As they drank, I made a silent vow. They thought I was a vegetable. They thought my mind was broken. But they had just made a fatal error. They had revealed their hand. I knew the timeline, I knew the price, and I knew exactly how much they were underestimating me. I was not gone. I was just waiting. And when I rose from this bed, I would not just take back my land. I would bury them in it. While I was rotting in my bedroom, convinced I was losing my mind, my 8-year-old daughter was witnessing the actual madness downstairs. Amara told me later that she had crept out of her room one evening because she was thirsty. The house was dark, but the kitchen lights were dimmed to a romantic glow. Amara stopped at the bottom of the staircase, her bare feet silent on the hardwood, when she heard a sound that did not belong. It was laughter. Low, intimate laughter that made her stomach tighten. She peeked around the corner, clutching her teddy bear, expecting to see her Uncle Marcus and Aunt Jessica having a late-night snack. But Marcus had gone home hours ago. Standing by the marble island were my husband and his sister-in-law. They were not discussing my medical care. They were not looking over bills. They were standing so close that not even a sheet of paper could fit between them. The next morning, Kendrick walked into my room with his usual mask of concern, carrying a glass of water and the small paper cup containing my medication. For weeks I had swallowed those yellow pills without question, trusting that my husband wanted me to heal. But after what I had witnessed in the kitchen the night before, trust was a luxury I could no longer afford. "Here you go, babe," Kendrick said, sitting on the edge of the bed. "Dr. Evans said it is crucial you keep the levels consistent in your blood." I sat up slowly, feigning the grogginess he expected to see. I reached for the cup and looked down at the pill. It was yellow and oval, just like the ones I had been taking for anxiety. But as the morning sunlight hit it, I noticed something different. The imprint on the side was not the alphanumeric code for the anti-anxiety medication I had been prescribed years ago. It was a slightly different shape. A generic sedative. A strong one. My heart hammered against my ribs, but I forced my face to remain slack. I popped the pill into my mouth, but instead of swallowing, I slid it expertly under my tongue. I took a large gulp of water, tilting my head back to sell the performance. "Did it go down?" Kendrick asked, watching me closely like a hawk. I nodded and opened my mouth slightly, lifting my tongue just enough to show an empty space while keeping the pill tucked safely in the soft tissue beneath. "Good girl," Kendrick said, patting my knee. "Rest now. Jessica and I have a meeting with the real estate agent in an hour." As soon as the door clicked shut, I scrambled out of bed and limped to the bathroom. I spit the dissolving pill into a tissue and flushed it down the toilet, watching the chemical yellow swirl away. I did this for 3 days. The withdrawal was brutal. My hands shook and I sweat through my sheets at night as my body screamed for the sedatives it had become dependent on. But with every hour of pain, the fog in my brain began to lift. It was like waking up from a long coma. The colors in the room became sharper. My thoughts, which had been swimming in molasses, suddenly snapped into focus. I remembered where I put my files. I remembered the passwords to my bank accounts. And most importantly, I remembered exactly who I was. I was not a helpless invalid. I was a shark in the shipping industry. I had negotiated deals with hardened union bosses and navigated international trade wars. And I was letting two amateurs dismantle my life because I had been too drugged to fight back. On the third night of my sobriety, I lay in bed listening to the house settle. My mind was racing not with paranoia, but with strategy. I needed evidence. I knew they were planning to declare me incompetent, but I needed to know exactly when and how. I needed eyes and ears outside of this room. And then I remembered the one person in the house who was constantly underestimated just like me, my daughter Amara. It was Thursday when the executioner arrived wearing a white coat. Dr. Evans was not just any psychiatrist. He was Kendrick's golf partner and a man with a significant gambling debt that I knew about because I had once refused to loan him money to cover it. Now he was standing at the foot of my bed holding a clipboard that contained my death sentence. Kendrick stood by the door, arms crossed, guarding the exit like a warden. I let my head loll to the side, keeping my eyelids heavy and my breathing shallow. I had to play the part of the broken woman perfectly. If they suspected for even a second that I was lucid, they would force the pills down my throat, or worse. "She is getting worse," Doc Kendrick said, his voice dropping to a theatrical whisper. "Last night she tried to set fire to the curtains. She was screaming about snakes in the walls. She does not even recognize me anymore. It is unsafe for Amara. It is unsafe for everyone." I bit my tongue to keep from screaming. I had never set fire to anything. I had spent the night staring at the ceiling, counting the cracks in the plaster to keep my mind sharp. But Dr. Evans did not ask me for my side of the story. He did not check my vitals or ask about the withdrawal symptoms. Instead, he simply pulled a gold pen from his pocket and clicked it. A sound that echoed like a gunshot in the silent room. "It is a clear case of paranoid schizophrenia with violent tendencies," Evans announced without even touching me. "I am recommending immediate involuntary commitment. There is a facility in Switzerland that specializes in heavy cases like this. Very private, very secure. Once she is there, she will not be able to leave without a guardian's consent." Kendrick took the clipboard, his hands trembling slightly, not with fear but with excitement. "And this gives me full conservatorship." "Complete control," Evans confirmed. "You control her assets, her medical decisions, and her location. This document supersedes her rights as a citizen because she is a danger to herself. The ambulance will be here tomorrow morning at 8 to transport her to the airfield. Have her bags packed." "Thank you, Doc Kendrick," said, a smile spreading across his face that was pure evil. "You have no idea how much this helps the family." "I am just doing my job," Evans replied, checking his watch. "Now, about that consulting fee we discussed." "Do not worry," Kendrick said, placing a hand on the doctor's shoulder. "Once the bank accounts are unlocked on Monday, you will be the first check I write." They shook hands right over my body, sealing the deal to bury me alive in a foreign country. As they walked out of the room, laughing about their tea time on Saturday, I opened my eyes. The fog was gone. The fear was gone, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. Tomorrow morning at 8. I had less than 24 hours to save my life, and I knew exactly who I needed to signal. My daughter Amara was 8 years old, but she possessed the emotional intelligence of a woman 3 times her age. She had been watching the house change. She had seen her vibrant mother turn into a ghost and her father turn into a monster. She knew something was wrong, but until that Thursday evening, she had felt powerless to stop it. That night, Kendrick allowed her a 5-minute supervised visit to say goodnight. He stood by the door, arms crossed, tapping his foot impatiently, checking his watch every 30 seconds. Amara climbed onto the bed, her movements hesitant and fearful. She looked at me, searching for the glazed, vacant stare she had grown used to over the past few weeks. Instead, she found my eyes clear, sharp, and burning with a fierce intensity. I took her small hand in mine. I squeezed 3 times. Quick, sharp, intentional. It was our secret signal from when she was a toddler. 3 squeezes meant I love you. But tonight it meant I am here. I am present. I am fighting. Amara's eyes widened slightly. She froze, waiting to see if it was a muscle spasm or a message. I did it again. 3 sharp squeezes. A spark of recognition lit up her face. She squeezed back 4 times. I am with you. I leaned close to her ear, pretending to kiss her goodnight. Kendrick took a step forward, suspicious. Time is up, Amara, he barked. Let mommy sleep. I held her for 1 second longer. iPad. I breathed into her hair, barely making a sound. Record everything. Do not let them see. Amara pulled back. She did not nod. She did not smile. She simply looked at me with a solemn determination that broke my heart and filled it with pride simultaneously. She slid off the bed and walked past her father. "Good night, Daddy," she said, her voice devoid of the fear she had shown days prior. Kendrick did not notice the shift. He was too busy texting Jessica. That was his fatal mistake. He thought Amara was just collateral damage. He did not realize she was the surveillance team. From that moment on, Amara became a phantom in her own home. She weaponized her invisibility. To Kendrick and Jessica, she was just a nuisance, a child glued to her screen playing silly games. They did not realize that the pink iPad case concealed a high-definition camera lens. She started leaving the device in strategic locations, propped up on the kitchen counter behind a cereal box while they discussed transferring my funds. Tucked into the bookshelf in the living room, while Jessica bragged on the phone about her new status as the lady of the house. Amara learned to walk softly, to blend into the shadows, and to hit the record button with the speed of a professional spy. One afternoon, I watched through the crack in my door as Jessica stood in the hallway berating the cleaning staff. Amara was sitting on the floor nearby, apparently absorbed in a cartoon, but I saw the angle of the screen. She was recording every word of Jessica's tirade, every slur and every threat. My daughter was building the case that would save my life, and she was doing it right under their noses. They thought they were the predators, but they had no idea they were being hunted by an 8-year-old girl with a tablet. The explosion happened on a Friday afternoon. The house was quiet until the sound of shattering glass, followed by a terrified scream, tore through the silence. It was Amara. My mother's instinct overrode the weakness in my limbs. I threw off the covers and dragged myself out of bed, ignoring the searing pain in my healing leg. I stumbled into the hallway, catching myself on the walls, breathing hard as I made my way to the top of the stairs. Below me in the foyer, a scene of cruelty was unfolding. Amara was cowering on the floor, clutching her cheek, while a puddle of grape juice soaked into the pristine white rug Jessica had bought with my money. Jessica stood over my daughter, her face twisted into a mask of ugly rage. Her hand was raised, and before I could even shout, she brought it down again, striking Amara across the face with a sickening smack. "You clumsy little brat," Jessica shrieked. "Do you know how much this rug cost? I am trying to make this house civilized, and you are ruining everything just like your mother." The sight of my child being struck ignited a fire in my blood that burned away the pain and the fear. I did not need crutches. I did not need pills. I needed to kill her. I moved faster than I had in months, descending the stairs with a clumsy desperation. "Get away from her!" I screamed, my voice raw and guttural. Jessica spun around, eyes wide with surprise, but she did not back down. She looked at me with disgust as I limped toward her, placing myself between her and Amara. "Oh, look who decided to wake up," Jessica sneered. "Your feral daughter just destroyed a $5,000 rug, Dominique. Since you refused to discipline her, I had to step in." "You touched her," I hissed, my hands shaking into fists. "You put your hands on my child. Get out of my house, Jessica. Get out now. I lunged forward intending to push her out the door, but I never reached her. A heavy hand grabbed my shoulder and yanked me back with brutal force. It was Kendrick. He had emerged from the study, and instead of checking on his weeping daughter, he placed himself protectively in front of Jessica. Calm down, Dominique, Kendrick roared, shoving me backward. You are acting crazy again. Jessica was just disciplining her. He pushed me hard. Too hard for a woman recovering from a broken leg. I stumbled, my bad leg buckling under the pressure. I fell backward, my arms flailing for purchase, but finding only empty air. The back of my head collided with the sharp edge of the console table with a sickening crack before I hit the floor. White light exploded behind my eyes, followed by a warm trickle of liquid running down my neck. The room spun violently. Through the ringing in my ears, I heard Amara scream, a sound of pure terror. Mommy, Amara cried, trying to rush to me. But Kendrick grabbed her by the back of her dress, holding her back. Look what you made me do! He spat down at me, not an ounce of remorse in his voice. You are out of control, Dominique. You are violent and unstable. He turned to Jessica, who was looking at my bleeding head with a cold calculation. Call the police, Jessica, he said calmly. Tell them my wife has finally snapped. Tell them she attacked you and in the struggle she hurt herself. We cannot keep her here anymore. It is time for the professionals to take over. I lay on the floor watching my blood stain the hardwood, listening to my husband frame me for my own assault, while my daughter watched in helpless horror. The police arrived less than 10 minutes later, their blue lights flashing through the bay windows, casting a chaotic rhythm across the walls of my foyer. 2 officers walked in. One was a young rookie looking nervous, and the other was a seasoned veteran with a buzz cut and a look of annoyance on his face. Before they could even assess the scene, Jessica launched into her performance. She rushed toward them, clutching her chest, her breathing ragged and shallow. Thank God you are here, she sobbed, collapsing slightly so the rookie officer had to catch her by the elbow. I have never been so terrified in my life. She just snapped, officer. She went completely crazy. The veteran officer looked around the room. He saw the shattered glass, the stained rug, and me lying on the floor with blood matting my hair. Then he looked at Kendrick, who was standing calmly with his hands raised in a gesture of surrender. What happened here? The officer asked, his hand resting on his belt near his taser. My wife, Kendrick said, his voice shaking with a fake sadness. She has been struggling with severe mental health issues since her car accident. Today, she had a violent episode. She attacked my sister-in-law. She was throwing things, screaming at our daughter. I tried to restrain her, but she threw herself backward and hit her head. The officer looked down at me. To him, I was not a victim. I was a suspect. I was the angry black woman bleeding on the floor, while the weeping white woman in pearls needed protection. He did not ask if I needed an ambulance. He did not ask for my side of the story. "Ma'am, stay on the ground," the officer commanded, stepping over me to hand Jessica a tissue. "Do not make any sudden movements." I tried to speak. I tried to tell him that my husband pushed me, that Jessica struck my child, but my head was swimming and my words came out in a garbled slur. "He pushed me," I whispered, pointing a trembling finger at Kendrick. "Arrest him." The officer exchanged a look with Kendrick. A look of male solidarity, a look that said, "Women right." "She is clearly disoriented," Kendrick said, tapping his temple. "The medication makes her paranoid. She thinks everyone is out to get her." Jessica blew her nose loudly. "We just want her to be safe, officer. We do not want to press charges. We just need a police report to show the doctors so we can get her admitted to a facility. She is a danger to herself and others." The officer nodded, pulling out his notepad. He began writing. I could see the words upside down, but the intent was clear. Domestic disturbance, suspect female, unstable, aggressive. That piece of paper was the final nail in my coffin. It was the official government stamp that validated their lies. "You are doing the right thing, sir," the officer said to Kendrick, tearing off the carbon copy and handing it to him. "Get her some help before she hurts someone else." As the police walked out, leaving me on the floor with my captors, Jessica stopped crying instantly. She looked down at me holding the police report like a trophy. Her eyes were dry and cold. "See, Dominique," she whispered, leaning close so only I could hear. "The world sees what we show them, and right now they see a monster." The dust had barely settled from the police visit when Kendrick walked back into the room. The mask was completely gone now. There was no more furrowed brow or fake tears. He looked energized. He looked like a man who had just won the lottery. He held a thick manila envelope in his hand, and with a casual flick of his wrist, he tossed it onto the bed. It landed on my chest with a heavy thud. "Read it," Kendrick said, leaning against the doorframe with his arms crossed. "Although I doubt you have the mental capacity to understand the legal jargon right now." I pulled the papers out with trembling hands. I did not tremble from fear. I trembled from the sheer effort of holding back the rage that threatened to consume me. The bold letters at the top of the page screamed, "Petition for dissolution of marriage." I scanned the document, my eyes catching the key phrases that outlined the destruction of my life. Irreconcilable differences, spousal support, equitable distribution of assets. "You want half," I whispered, my voice barely audible. "You want half of my company. My father built that company from nothing. You never lifted a finger, Kendrick." "I supported you emotionally," Kendrick scoffed, pushing off the doorframe and walking toward the bed. "I was the face of the family while you were working late. That is worth 50%, Dominique. The law is on my side, especially now." He tapped the police report that was still sitting on the nightstand. "With this report and Dr. Evans' testimony proving your mental incompetence, I am going to get everything. I get the house, I get the alimony, and most importantly, I get the company. Jessica and I are going to sell it to the highest bidder and finally live the life we deserve." I flipped to the last page and felt my blood run cold. Paragraph 4. Sole physical and legal custody of the minor child, Amara Brooks, with supervised visitation for the mother at the discretion of the father. "You are trying to take my daughter," I said, looking up at him. "I am saving her," Kendrick corrected, a cruel smile playing on his lips. "You are unfit, Dominique. Look at you. You are a drug addict who attacks family members. No judge in Georgia will let you near a child. Amara needs stability. She needs Jessica. A woman who knows how to raise a proper lady, not a workaholic who thinks money solves everything." He leaned down, placing his hands on the mattress on either side of my legs, trapping me. His cologne, the expensive one I bought him for his birthday, filled my nose, making me nauseous. "You are done, Dominique," he whispered, his face inches from mine. "You are finished. By Monday, you will be on a plane to Switzerland, and I will be the CEO of Brooks Logistics. You built the throne, baby, but I am the one who is going to sit on it." He stood up and straightened his jacket, looking at me with pure contempt. "Pack your bags. And do not try anything stupid. The police are just a phone call away, and next time they won't just write a report. They will take you out in cuffs." He turned and walked out, whistling a happy tune, leaving me alone with the paperwork that detailed the end of my existence. But as I stared at his retreating back, I did not feel defeated. I felt focused. He had shown me his entire hand. He thought the game was over. He did not realize that I had an ace up my sleeve, and her name was Amara. The memory of Kendrick standing over me with those divorce papers faded as the harsh fluorescent lights of the courtroom pulled me back to the present. The bailiff finished connecting the white cable to Amara's pink tablet, and a large projection screen slowly descended from the ceiling behind the judge's bench. The mechanical hum of the motor was the only sound in the room. It sounded like the countdown of a bomb. Kendrick was gripping the arms of his chair so tightly his knuckles were white. He looked at his lawyer, who gave him a small, reassuring nod, but I could see the sweat beading on my husband's forehead. Jessica sat perfectly still, her posture rigid like a statue. She was staring at the blank screen with a mixture of defiance and dread, knowing that whatever was on that device was recorded by a child she had underestimated. She was likely running through every conversation she had held in that house, wondering which one had been captured. Judge Vane leaned forward, his eyes narrowing behind his spectacles. "Proceed," he ordered, his voice echoing in the silence. The bailiff tapped the screen. The projection flickered to life. The image was high definition, but the angle was odd. It was slightly tilted, framed by the edge of a cereal box and the leaves of a potted plant. It was low to the ground, the vantage point of a spy who was small enough to be invisible. The digital date stamp in the corner read November 14th, 7:42 p.m. That was the night I supposedly attacked Jessica. That was the night they called the police. The audio crackled first, followed by voices that were undeniably clear. I watched the faces of the jury members shift from boredom to intense curiosity. On the screen, my kitchen appeared. It was pristine and white, the result of Jessica's minimalist purge. Kendrick walked into the frame wearing the same blue shirt he was wearing in the courtroom right now. He was holding a mortar and pestle. Jessica followed him, her hand resting possessively on his lower back. They thought they were alone. They thought the lady of the house was comatose upstairs and the child was asleep. They were wrong on both counts. "Turn it off," Kendrick shouted, standing up, his composure finally shattering. "This is a violation of privacy. You cannot show this. That was recorded without my consent." "Sit down, Mr. Brooks," the judge roared, slamming his gavel down with a force that made everyone jump. "One more outburst and I will hold you in contempt of court." The video continues. Kendrick sank back into his chair, defeated. He looked at me across the aisle. I met his gaze, and for the first time in 6 months I did not look away. I did not blink. I let him see the fire that had been burning inside me since the moment he pushed me down the stairs. The screen was huge, illuminating the dark lies they had told. And as the video played on, I watched the color drain from Jessica's face, leaving her looking like a ghost in her designer pearls. The courtroom was no longer a place of law. It was a theater, and the horror movie was just beginning. The video playing on the screen was grainy, but the audio was crystal clear. It showed my kitchen on a Tuesday evening, the timestamp confirming it was just 3 days before the incident with the rug. Kendrick was standing at the island with his back partially to the camera, but his actions were unmistakable. He was holding a heavy stone mortar and pestle. The rhythmic grinding sound echoed through the courtroom speakers, a harsh, scraping noise that made the jurors wince. I watched as my husband tipped a handful of yellow pills into the stone bowl. He ground them down with a methodical intensity, his jaw set tight. Beside him, Jessica was leaning against the counter holding a glass of red wine. She looked relaxed. She looked like a woman who had already won. "Make sure it is a fine powder," Jessica said, taking a sip of her wine. "If she tastes any grit, she might spit it out again. She is getting harder to trick." Kendrick scraped the yellow dust into a bowl of steaming oatmeal. "Do not worry," he replied, stirring it vigorously. "I added extra cinnamon to mask the bitterness. This batch is strong. Dr. Evans gave me the double-strength samples." He held the spoon up, inspecting his work. "This is it, Jessica. This is the dose that buys us our freedom." Jessica threw her head back and laughed. It was a sound that chilled me to the bone. It was not a joyful laugh. It was a guttural, barbaric sound of pure malice. She walked over to Kendrick and wrapped her arms around his waist, resting her chin on his shoulder as they both looked down at the poisoned food intended for me. "Perfect," she purred, her voice dripping with satisfaction. "That liquor cocktail is enough to keep her out for 18 hours. She will be a zombie. That gives us plenty of time to meet the notary. We can guide her hand to sign the land transfer papers, and she won't even know what year it is. By the time she wakes up, the harbor land will be sold and the money will be in the Cayman account." The video froze, there paused by the judge. The silence in the courtroom was absolute. It was the kind of silence that happens when the air is sucked out of a room. Judge Vane took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. His hand was shaking slightly. He looked from the frozen image of my husband poisoning me to the real man sitting before him. Kendrick was no longer sweating. He was gray. He stared at the table in front of him, unable to lift his head. His lawyer had closed his folder, a universal sign that he knew there was no defense for what had just been shown. This was not a domestic dispute. This was not a he said she said situation. This was premeditated poisoning captured in high definition. I looked at the jury. The woman in the front row, who had looked at me with suspicion earlier, now had her hand over her mouth in horror. The man beside her was glaring at Kendrick with open hostility. The narrative had shifted instantly. I was no longer the unstable wife. I was the victim of a cold, calculated conspiracy. And looking at Jessica's frozen, terrified face, I knew that Amara was not done yet. There were 2 more videos to play, and the next one would destroy whatever shred of dignity they had left. The courtroom was still reeling from the poisoning revelation when the screen flickered to the next file. The timestamp read, October 24th, nearly midnight. The setting was the hallway outside the guest suite where Jessica had been staying. The lighting was dim, casting long shadows against the walls, but there was no mistaking the 2 figures, locked in a passionate embrace against the doorframe. It was visceral and disgusting. My husband was kissing his brother's wife with a hunger that made me look away in shame. But the camera did not look away. Amara had propped the iPad on the hallway console table, hidden behind a vase of lilies, capturing every sordid detail. They broke apart, gasping for air, but they did not separate. Kendrick rested his forehead against Jessica's, his hands gripping her waist possessively. "I cannot wait until she is gone," Jessica whispered, her voice breathless and cruel. "Living in this house with her is exhausting. She is like a cockroach that just won't die no matter how much poison we feed her." "Patience, baby," Kendrick replied, kissing her neck. "The paperwork is almost ready. Dr. Evans is on board. Once we drop her off at the airfield, she is someone else's problem. Then the company is ours." Jessica pulled back, looking into his eyes with a cold, hard stare. "And the money, Kendrick. Do not forget the money. As soon as the wire transfer hits from the land sale, I am filing the papers. I am done with Marcus." In the courtroom, I heard a strangled sound from the gallery. It was a sound of pure heartbreak. I did not need to look back to know it was Marcus. He was watching his wife, the woman he had defended against me, outline her plan to discard him like trash. "He is useless," Jessica continued on the screen, oblivious to the future audience watching her. "He is weak, and he has no ambition. He is happy working a 9-to-5 job while I deserve the world. Once we have the 20 million, we are going to Europe. Just you and me. We will leave Marcus here with his debt and his broken heart, and we will leave Dominique to rot in that asylum." Kendrick laughed, a low, dark sound. "Europe sounds perfect. No baggage, no ex-wives, just us and the money." They kissed again, sealing their pact of betrayal. The video ended, leaving a frozen image of their lips locked together, looming over the courtroom like a billboard of sin. The silence that followed was heavy with shock. Jessica was shaking her head violently, her hands covering her mouth as if she could stuff the words back inside. She dared not turn around. She dared not look at the gallery where her husband sat. But I looked. Marcus was standing up, his face the color of ash. He looked at the screen, then at the back of his wife's head. The realization washed over him like a tidal wave. He had been a pawn. He had betrayed his sister-in-law and abandoned his morals for a woman who was planning to leave him the moment his bank account ran dry. The judge looked at Marcus with pity, then turned his gaze back to the defense table. His eyes were no longer impartial. They were filled with the righteous anger of a man who had seen enough. If the first 2 videos were smoking guns, this third one was a nuclear bomb. It began with a timestamp from 3 weeks ago. The scene was the master bathroom. Jessica was standing in front of the mirror, holding Amara's hairbrush, pulling strands of hair from the bristles, with a look of utter disgust on her face. Kendrick was sitting on the edge of the bathtub, scrolling through his phone. "I hate this texture," Jessica said, flicking the hair into the trash can, as if it were contaminated waste. "It is so coarse. It ruins my manicure every time I have to style it. Why could she not have taken after your side of the family, Kendrick? She is so dark. It is like trying to make a shadow look presentable." Kendrick did not defend his daughter. He did not tell his sister-in-law to stop insulting his child's DNA. Instead, he chuckled without looking up. "She is a Brooks," Kendrick said dismissively. "We have strong genes. Just relax, babe. Once we get custody, you can cut it all off if you want. We can get her a wig." Jessica leaned against the counter examining her nails. "I might just do that. I do not want to be seen in public with her looking like that. People will think I am the nanny. But we need her for now. That little girl is the key to the castle." She turned to Kendrick, pointing the hairbrush at him. "Do not forget the math, Kendrick. The child support guidelines for a high-net-worth individual like Dominique are insane. We are looking at $4,000 a month minimum plus access to the education trust. That covers the lease on the new Porsche and the condo in Buckhead. So I will hug the little brat and pretend I love her nappy hair. But you better make it worth my while." Kendrick stood up and kissed her forehead. "Just bear with it, baby. She is our retirement plan. Think of her as a very expensive ATM. We just have to punch in the right code to get the cash." The video cut to black. The silence in the courtroom was different this time. It was not the silence of shock. It was the silence of violence. It was the heavy, suffocating pressure that comes before a riot. The court reporter had stopped typing, her hands hovering over the keys, her mouth agape. The bailiff, a large African-American man who had been stone-faced throughout the trial, was gripping his belt, his eyes fixed on Kendrick with a look of pure hatred. Racism is ugly in any form, but hearing it from the woman who wanted to raise my child and seeing it endorsed by the man who helped create her was a violation of nature. I looked at the jury. The 3 black women in the jury box were no longer looking at the evidence. They were looking at Jessica with a collective fury that could burn a city to the ground. Even the white jurors looked nauseated. Jessica Miller had just admitted to the court that she viewed my daughter as nothing more than a dark-skinned paycheck to be exploited and erased. Jessica was trembling so violently that her pearl necklace rattled against her collarbone. She looked at the judge but found no mercy there. Judge Vane was staring at her with eyes that were cold and hard as flint. He did not say a word for a long time. He simply let the weight of her own words crush her. Kendrick tried to say something, to stammer out an excuse, but the sound died in his throat. He knew. We all knew. There was no coming back from this. They had not just lost the case. They had lost their humanity in the eyes of everyone in that room. The screen faded to black, but the stain of their words remained in the air like a toxic cloud. For a heartbeat, there was absolute silence. Then the courtroom erupted. It was not the polite murmuring of a legal proceeding. It was a collective gasp of horror, followed by a low rumble of pure disgust that started from the back of the room and washed over the defense table like a tidal wave. The 3 women in the jury box were openly glaring at Jessica, their arms crossed in judgment. Even the court stenographer had stopped typing, her hands hovering over the keys as she looked at the defendants with undisguised revulsion. Judge Vane did not reach for his gavel immediately. He gripped the edge of his mahogany bench so hard that his knuckles turned white. His face, usually a mask of judicial impartiality, was flushed with a deep crimson rage. The veins in his neck bulged against his collar. He looked from the black screen to the 2 people sitting before him, and the look in his eyes was terrifying. It was the look of a father who had seen a child threatened. It was the look of a man who had seen the face of evil and was preparing to strike it down. Jessica Miller sat frozen in her chair, a statue of ruin. The color had drained from her face completely, leaving her skin with a sickly gray pallor that clashed violently with her expensive pearls. She stared straight ahead, unseeing. Her mouth was slightly open, but no sound came out. She knew. In that moment, she knew that her life as she understood it was over. The social status she craved, the wealth she plotted for, and the reputation she groomed were all incinerated in seconds by the very child she had mocked. Kendrick was shaking his head, muttering to himself, trying to shrink into his suit as if he could disappear into the fabric. He looked at his lawyer, pleading for a lifeline, but his attorney was busy distancing himself physically, inching his chair away from his client as if Kendrick were radioactive. Then came the sound that shattered the tension completely. A heavy thud from the gallery followed by a sharp intake of breath from the onlookers. I turned in my seat. Marcus stood up, his legs trembling violently. He looked at the back of his wife's head with an expression of shattered reality. He opened his mouth to speak, perhaps to scream, but his knees gave out. He collapsed onto the wooden bench, his hands clutching his chest, as if his heart had physically burst from the weight of the betrayal. He began to sob. It was not a quiet cry. It was the deep, guttural wailing of a man who realized he had been sleeping next to a monster. He had realized that while he was working to pay her bills, she was planning to rob his brother's family and abandon him. The bailiff rushed over to check on him, but Marcus pushed him away. His eyes locked on Jessica. "You knew," he screamed, his voice cracking. "You knew she wasn't crazy. You made me believe she was crazy. You made me betray my family." Jessica flinched as if she had been slapped, but she did not turn around. She could not face him. She could not face me. And she certainly could not face the judge who was now raising his gavel, not to restore order, but to deliver judgment. The sound of the wood striking the block echoed like a gunshot, signaling the end of the lies and the beginning of the reckoning. Judge Vane did not sit back down. He remained standing, towering over the courtroom like an avenging angel in black robes. He pointed his gavel at the defense table, not as a tool of order, but as a weapon of judgment. "Bailiffs, secure the courtroom," he boomed, his voice shaking the very walls. "No one leaves." Kendrick stood up, his chair screeching against the floor. "Your Honor, wait," he stammered, holding his hands up. "That video was taken out of context. It was a joke. We were just joking about the medication." "Sit down, Mr. Brooks," the judge roared. "This court has seen enough. Based on the evidence presented in the last 10 minutes, I am suspending these civil divorce proceedings effective immediately. This is no longer a domestic dispute. This is a crime scene." He turned his gaze to the two armed officers standing by the exit. "Officers, take Mr. Kendrick Brooks and Mrs. Jessica Miller into custody immediately." The room erupted into chaos. Kendrick tried to scramble backward, tripping over his own briefcase. "This is a mistake," he screamed as the bailiff grabbed his arm and twisted it behind his back. "I am a businessman. You cannot do this." The sound of the handcuffs ratcheting shut was the sweetest melody I had ever heard. Click, click, the sound of my freedom. Judge Vane looked down at them, his face grim. "You are being held without bail pending an immediate investigation by the district attorney. The charges based on this video evidence are conspiracy to commit murder, aggravated assault with intent to do great bodily harm, fraud, and child endangerment." Jessica did not fight. When the female officer pulled her hands behind her back, Jessica went limp. She looked at me across the aisle, her eyes wide with a terrifying realization. The game was not just lost. The board had been flipped. The jewels, the European vacation, the luxury condo, it was all gone. Replaced by a concrete cell and a prison jumpsuit. "You have the right to remain silent," the officer recited, dragging Jessica toward the side door. Kendrick was not so dignified. He was thrashing, trying to look at the gallery, trying to find someone, anyone who would help him. "Marcus," he shouted at his brother. "Marcus, tell them we are good people." Marcus lifted his head from his hands. His face was wet with tears, but his eyes were hard. "I do not know you," he whispered loud enough for the room to hear. "I do not know either of you." As they dragged Kendrick past my table, he lunged toward me, restrained only by the heavy grip of the bailiff. "Dominique, tell them," he pleaded, desperation breaking his voice. "I am your husband. We can work this out. I love you." I looked him dead in the eye. My face remained completely impassive. I did not smile. I did not frown. I simply watched him with the cold, clinical detachment of a scientist observing a specimen. "I am sorry," I said, my voice steady and clear. "The Dominique you are looking for is unavailable. She is busy running a company." The heavy oak doors slammed shut behind them, cutting off his screams. The silence that rushed back into the room was heavy, but it was clean. It was the air of justice. I looked at the empty defense table, then at the blank screen where my daughter's bravery had saved my life. I let out a breath I felt like I had been holding for 6 months. It was over. The monsters were gone. The heavy oak doors had not fully closed when the bailiff paused, struggling to get a better grip on Kendrick's thrashing form. My husband, the man who had poisoned my oatmeal and sold my legacy, looked back at me one last time. His eyes were wide with a frantic, animalistic confusion. He looked at the wheelchair I was sitting in, then at the projection screen, and finally at my face. He was searching for the broken, drugged woman he had created. He was looking for the victim. He would not find her. I placed my hands on the armrests of the wheelchair. For months my muscles had been atrophied by their sedatives and my spirit crushed by their gaslighting. But the adrenaline of justice is a powerful antidote. I pushed down. My knuckles turned white, not from fear but from exertion. I engaged my core, ignoring the sharp protest of my healing leg, and I rose. A collective gasp rippled through the gallery. To them it was like watching Lazarus rise from the grave. I stood to my full height, taller than Jessica, taller than the lies they had buried me under. I reached down and adjusted my blazer, smoothing out the wrinkles with a deliberate, sharp precision. I buttoned the jacket, signifying that business was back in session. I took a step forward. My leg throbbed, but I did not stumble. I walked toward the railing that separated the free from the condemned. I locked eyes with Kendrick across the room. He stopped fighting the bailiff. He just stared, his mouth hanging open, realizing too late that he had never actually broken me. He had only made me dormant. "You forgot one thing, Kendrick," I said, my voice projecting clear and cold to the back of the room without a microphone. He blinked, tears of self-pity streaming down his face. "I am a sailor's daughter," I continued, my voice hardening like steel. "I was raised on the docks. My father taught me that the water is dangerous only if you do not respect it. But more importantly, he taught me how to read the horizon. I know how to see the storm before it hits, and I know how to batten down the hatches and wait for the weather to clear." Kendrick slumped in the bailiff's grip. The realization hit him with the force of a physical blow. I had seen the signs. I had gathered the evidence. I had weathered his hurricane, and now I was the one left standing on the deck. "Take him away," Judge Vane ordered, his patience exhausted. The doors slammed shut, severing the connection between my past and my future. I stood alone in the center of the courtroom, the silence now filled with a sense of awe. I turned to look at the gallery, at the faces of the people who had doubted me. I did not smile. I did not gloat. I simply nodded to my lawyer. "We are done here," I said, turning my back on the empty defense table. "I have a board meeting to convene, and I have a very brave little girl waiting for me in the witness room." I walked out of that courtroom not with a limp, but with a stride. The nightmare was over. The queen had returned to her castle, and the usurpers were in chains. The interrogation room at the precinct was a stark contrast to the luxury Kendrick had been trying to steal. It was cold gray and smelled of stale coffee and fear. I stood behind the one-way glass with my lawyer, Mr. Sterling, watching my husband try to negotiate his way out of a life sentence. Kendrick was handcuffed to a metal table, his expensive suit rumpled and sweat stains darkening his collar. He was shouting at the detective, slamming his fist on the table. "You do not understand," Kendrick yelled, his voice cracking with panic. "I have money! I can pay the bail. I just closed a deal for $20 million this morning. The wire transfer is pending. I can pay whatever you want, just let me call my banker." The detective looked at him with a bored expression, but before he could speak, the door opened. Mr. Sterling walked into the room carrying a thin leather folder. I stayed behind the glass, a silent observer to the final destruction of Kendrick's ego. Mr. Sterling placed the folder on the table and sat down opposite Kendrick. He did not look angry, he looked amused. "Mr. Brooks," Mr. Sterling began, smoothing his tie, "I'm afraid there seems to be a significant misunderstanding regarding your financial situation. You keep mentioning this $20 million sale of the Southside Harbor land. Kendrick sat up straighter, clinging to this last shred of hope. Yes, the sale is legal. I signed the contract this morning using the power of attorney. The buyers are a development group from Miami. They are legitimate. The money is mine. Mr. Sterling opened the folder and slid a single document across the metal table. It was a deed of trust dated exactly 1 year ago. Actually, Mr. Sterling said, his voice calm and professional, you sold them absolutely nothing. You see, Dominique did not own the Southside Harbor land. Not anymore. Kendrick squinted at the paper. What is this? He whispered. 12 months ago, Dominique transferred the entire harbor property into the Amara Brooks Irrevocable Trust, Mr. Sterling explained. She anticipated that something might happen to her or the business, so she ring-fenced the family's most valuable asset to ensure Amara's future. The land belongs to your daughter, Mr. Brooks, and since you are not the trustee of that fund, your signature on that sale contract is worthless. I watched Kendrick's face turn a ghostly shade of white. His mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. But Kendrick stammered. But I took the deposit. The buyers sent a non-refundable deposit of $500,000 to the offshore account. I spent it. I bought the Porsche. I paid off Jessica's credit cards. Mr. Sterling leaned forward, his expression turning grave. Then I suggest you ask the police for protective custody, because we looked into your buyers. That Miami development group is a front for a very dangerous cartel. You just scammed a crime syndicate out of $500,000 for land you did not own. When they find out the contract is void, they will not be suing you for breach of contract. They will be looking for blood. Kendrick slumped back in his chair, the metal handcuffs clattering against the table. The reality of his situation crashed down on him. He was not just going to prison. He was broke, debt-ridden, and marked for death by the very criminals he had tried to impress. I stepped away from the glass. There was nothing left to see. He had dug his own grave with greed, and now he had to lie in it. Mr. Sterling stood up and collected his papers, leaving Kendrick alone in the cold, gray room to contemplate a future that had suddenly become very short and very violent. Jessica managed to post bail 3 hours after Kendrick, but it cost her the last shred of her dignity. She had to sign over the title of her Mercedes and her entire jewelry collection to a sleazy bondsman just to buy a few days of freedom before the trial. She walked out of the precinct into the pouring rain looking nothing like the socialite she pretended to be. Her mascara was running. Her silk blouse was stained with sweat, and for the first time in her life, she had absolutely nowhere to go. She took a taxi to the suburban home she shared with Marcus, convinced she could manipulate him one last time. She would cry. She would claim Kendrick forced her. Marcus was weak. He would believe her. He always believed her. But when the taxi pulled up to the driveway, Jessica saw her suitcases sitting on the wet pavement. They were soaking in the rain, their expensive leather ruining in the mud. Marcus was standing on the porch. He was not crying. He was holding a baseball bat in one hand and a stack of papers in the other. Marcus, let me in. Jessica pleaded, running up the driveway. It was all a misunderstanding. Kendrick drugged me too. You have to believe me. Marcus did not move. He tossed the papers at her feet. They landed in a puddle, the ink blurring instantly. That is the divorce petition, Marcus said, his voice terrifyingly calm. I filed it an hour ago. My lawyer is petitioning for an emergency annulment based on fraud. You are not getting half, Jessica. You are not getting the house. You are not getting a dime. You are getting exactly what you deserve. But I have nowhere to go. Jessica sobbed, reaching for his hand. Marcus pulled back as if she were contagious. That is not my problem, Marcus replied. I changed the locks. I canceled your credit cards, and I called your parents. They know everything, Jessica. They watched the video. They said, do not bother coming home. He turned to go back inside, but then he paused, looking back at her with a grim satisfaction. Oh, and there is one more thing. A man called the house looking for Kendrick about 20 minutes ago. He had a heavy accent. He said he represents the investors from Miami. Jessica froze. The blood drained from her face, leaving her pale as a sheet. He was very upset about his deposit, Marcus continued. He said Kendrick promised him the land, and now the contract is void. He asked where the money went. I told him the truth. I told him Kendrick spent some of it, but that you spent the rest on your wardrobe and your jewelry. You told him what Jessica whispered, terror gripping her throat. I gave him your cell phone number, Marcus said, opening the door. He said he wants to meet with you to discuss a repayment plan. I would not keep him waiting if I were you. Those men do not sound like the forgiving type. Marcus stepped inside and slammed the door, locking the deadbolt with a loud final click. Jessica stood alone in the rain, surrounded by her ruined luggage. Her phone began to ring in her pocket. She looked at the screen. It was an unknown number with a Miami area code. She stared at the phone as it vibrated, the sound buzzing against her palm like a warning buzzer. She had no husband. She had no money. She had no home. And now the sharks she had tried to swim with were circling, and they smelled blood. Jessica Miller sank to her knees on the wet asphalt and screamed, a sound of pure, hopeless ruin that was swallowed by the storm. County jail was a universe away from the climate-controlled luxury of the Brooks estate. It smelled of industrial disinfectant, stale urine, and human misery. Kendrick Brooks, the man who wore $3,000 suits and drank aged scotch, was stripped of his armor. The deputies took his Italian leather shoes, his belt, and the platinum watch Dominique had bought him for their 5th anniversary. In exchange, he was given a coarse orange jumpsuit that chafed his skin and a pair of cheap canvas slides that were 2 sizes too small. He was shoved into a holding cell designed for 10 men that currently held 20. The air was thick and hot. Kendrick pressed his back against the cold cinder block wall, trying to make himself as small as possible while simultaneously projecting an air of superior detachment. He looked at the other men with open disdain. To him, they were street trash, drug dealers and thieves. He was a businessman, a visionary. He did not belong here. I need to see the warden, Kendrick announced, his voice trembling slightly, but loud enough to turn heads. There has been a mistake. I have a medical condition. I cannot be in general population. A large man sitting on the metal bench looked up. He had a spiderweb tattoo on his neck and eyes that had seen too much violence. He stared at Kendrick with a predatory amusement. You are the guy from the news, the man said, his voice a low rumble. The guy who tried to poison his crippled wife for some land money. Kendrick bristled. It was a hostile takeover, he snapped, clinging to his corporate delusions. It was a business maneuver that was misunderstood. The cell erupted in laughter. It was not friendly laughter. It was the sound of wolves circling a wounded deer. Kendrick felt his stomach drop. He reached for his pocket, instinctively looking for his phone to call Jessica, to call his lawyer, to call anyone who would listen. But there was nothing there. That was when the true panic set in. It was not just the fear of violence, it was the narcissistic collapse. For years, Kendrick had fed off Dominique like a parasite. She provided the money, the status, and the admiration he craved. Then he had fed off Jessica's adoration. He needed to be worshipped. He needed to be the smartest man in the room. Now he was nobody. He was just inmate number 8940. Without a woman to manipulate or a bank account to flash, he was completely hollow. He felt a physical pain in his chest, a gaping void where his ego used to be. He was a king without a kingdom, shivering in a dirty orange suit. The man with the tattoo stood up and walked over to Kendrick, towering over him. You know who else is in here, he whispered, leaning close enough for Kendrick to smell the stale tobacco on his breath. Some boys from Miami. They heard about a guy named Brooks who wrote bad checks to their boss. They are in Block D, but news travels fast. Kendrick stopped breathing. The Miami connection. Mr. Sterling had not been lying. The man smiled, revealing a gold tooth. They said to tell you welcome to the neighborhood, and that you should watch your back in the shower. Kendrick slid down the wall until he hit the concrete floor. He pulled his knees to his chest and buried his face in his hands. He was trapped in a cage with men who despised him and hunted by a cartel he had robbed. And for the first time in his miserable life, Kendrick Brooks realized that he was not the main character of this story. He was just the prey. The first step in rebuilding an empire is securing the foundation. For the Brooks household, that foundation was Mrs. Hattie. I sent a town car to pick her up from her sister's house in Decatur on Saturday morning. When the car pulled into the driveway, I was waiting on the porch. I was still using a cane, but I was standing tall. Mrs. Hattie stepped out of the car looking hesitant. She clutched her handbag tightly, unsure if this was another trap. When she saw me, her face crumpled. I hobbled down the steps as fast as my leg would allow, and she met me halfway. We did not speak at first. We just held each other. She smelled like peppermint and safety. "I am so sorry, Hattie," I whispered into her shoulder. "I am so sorry I let them push you out." "Hush now, baby girl," Hattie said, pulling back to cup my face in her warm hands. "You were sick. The devil was in this house, but we cast him out. Now let us get inside. I have a feeling my kitchen is a mess, and I know for a fact you have not eaten a proper meal in months." Walking back into the house with Mrs. Hattie felt like the sun coming out after a long winter. Within an hour, the sterile silence Jessica had imposed was replaced by the clattering of pots and the humming of gospel tunes. The house finally felt like a home again. The next mission was deeper. It was about identity. On Sunday afternoon, I took Amara to a high-end natural hair salon in the city, a place where the stylist treated curls like royalty, not like a problem to be fixed. Amara sat in the chair looking at her reflection. Her hair was limp and heat damaged from Jessica's brutal straightening sessions. She looked small and defeated. The stylist, a vibrant woman with braids down to her waist, touched Amara's hair gently. "We are going to have to do a big chop to get the dead ends off," she explained softly. "But your curls are waiting underneath sugar. They just need room to breathe." "Do it," Amara said, her voice brave. "I want to look like me again." I held her hand while the scissors snipped away the damage. With every lock of straight, burnt hair that fell to the floor, it felt like we were cutting away a piece of the trauma. When the stylist was finished, she diffused Amara's hair until it formed a halo of tight, springy coils. Amara stared at herself in the mirror. Then a smile broke across her face. A real, genuine smile that reached her eyes. "I look like a cloud," she giggled, shaking her head to make the curls bounce. On Monday morning, the transformation was complete. The pink frilly dresses were packed in a box for donation. Amara marched into the kitchen wearing her favorite denim overalls and a t-shirt with the NASA logo. Her sneakers were scuffed, and she looked beautiful. Mrs. Hattie handed her a lunchbox filled with all her favorites. "You go learn something today, baby," Hattie said, kissing her forehead. "I drove her to school myself." When we pulled up to the curb, I felt a pang of anxiety. Would she be scared? Would she remember the last few months? But Amara opened the door and hopped out. She adjusted her backpack, waved at me, and ran toward her friends who were waiting by the swings. She did not look back. She did not hesitate. She was just a child again, free from the weight of adult cruelty. I watched her until she disappeared into the building, then I put the car in gear. It was time for me to go to work. Walking back into Brooks Logistics was not just a return to work. It was a reclamation of territory. I wore a crimson power suit that screamed authority, and although I still leaned on my cane, the tap of the wood against the marble floor echoed like a war drum. The whispers stopped the moment I swiped my security badge. The green light beeped a welcome sound that told everyone the Queen was back on the throne. I called an emergency meeting in the main boardroom at 10 o'clock sharp. The room was filled with faces I recognized, but not all of them were welcome. Sitting around the mahogany table were the men Kendrick had hired during his brief reign of terror. They were frat boys in expensive suits, men who had laughed at his jokes and looked the other way while he drained the company accounts. They looked nervous now, shifting in their leather chairs like schoolboys waiting for the principal. I did not sit down. I stood at the head of the table and placed a stack of files on the polished surface. Gentlemen, I began, my voice cool and steady. During my absence, this company lost its way. We prioritized flash over substance and cronyism over competence. That ends today. I opened the first file. Brad, you were the vice president of sales. According to these records, you spent $40,000 on client dinners in 3 months, yet sales are down 12%. You were not entertaining clients. You were partying with my husband. You are fired. Brad opened his mouth to protest, but I cut him off with a sharp look. Do not speak, I said. Just leave. Security is waiting to escort you out. I went down the line. The CFO who approved the suspicious transfers. The HR director, who ignored complaints from the female staff about Kendrick's behavior. One by one, I excised the cancer from my company. By noon, the boardroom was empty, save for the loyal staff members who had kept the lights on while I was fighting for my life. We had a lot of work to do, but the air was already lighter. The media was the next battleground. Instead of hiding from the scandal, I leaned into it. I gave an exclusive interview to Forbes magazine titled The Business of Survival. I sat for the cover photo without hiding my cane, looking directly into the camera with a fierce, unyielding gaze. I told the world the truth. I spoke about the gaslighting, the addiction to prescription pills, and the betrayal. The public reaction was instantaneous. I was no longer the crazy ex-wife from the viral video. I was a survivor. I became a symbol for women who had been marginalized and manipulated. Letters poured in from around the country. Women shared their stories of financial abuse and toxic marriages, thanking me for showing them that it is possible to fight back. I rebuilt Brooks Logistics with a new philosophy. Trust is good, but verification is better. I implemented strict auditing protocols and fired the entire nepotism hires list. I worked long hours, but for the first time in years, I felt energized. I was not just working for money anymore. I was working to prove that they could break my bones and poison my body, but they could never touch my mind. Late one evening, I stood by the floor-to-ceiling window in my office, looking out over the illuminated harbor. The cranes were moving containers, the trucks were rolling out, and the business was alive. I touched the cool glass, feeling the vibration of the city. I had paid a high price for this wisdom. It cost me my marriage and my innocence. But looking at the empire I had saved, I knew it was a price I was willing to pay. I was stronger now. I was sharper, and I was finally free. The sun was beginning to set over the Atlantic, casting a warm, golden glow across the deck of the Legacy. It was the first time in 2 years that my father's yacht had left the marina. For a long time, it had sat dry-docked, a symbol of a life I was too busy or too broken to live. But today, it cut through the waves with a smooth, powerful rhythm that matched the beating of my own heart. I stood at the railing, wearing a white linen dress that fluttered in the sea breeze. My cane was leaning against a deck chair behind me, but I did not need it. The salt air filled my lungs, clearing out the last lingering memories of the stale sick room where I had been held prisoner. I took a deep breath. It tasted like freedom. Look, Mommy, Amara called out, running to my side. Her natural curls were bouncing in the wind, free and wild, just like her spirit. She pointed toward the coastline where the industrial silhouette of the Southside harbor rose against the orange sky. I followed her finger. From this distance, the cranes looked like toy machines moving containers that held millions of dollars in goods. The land was bustling, alive and thriving. It was the land Kendrick had tried to sell for pennies, the land Jessica had tried to spend on a European vacation. But there it stood, solid and immovable, firmly anchored in the Amara Brooks irrevocable trust. It looks busy today, Amara said, resting her chin on the railing. It is busy, baby, I replied, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. And it is going to stay busy. That is your future right there. No one can ever take that away from you. Not a bank, not a husband, no one. Amara looked up at me, her eyes bright with a wisdom that exceeded her years. We beat them, didn't we, Mommy? The bad people. I smiled down at her. Yes, we did. We beat them because they made the biggest mistake a predator can make. They forgot that the prey might have teeth. I turned to the small table set up on the aft deck. There was a bottle of vintage Bordeaux, breathing in the sea air, and a bottle of sparkling apple cider. I picked up the wine bottle. My hand was steady. There was no tremor, no hesitation. I poured the deep red liquid into a crystal glass, watching it swirl. It was clear, it was pure. There was no yellow powder, no sediment, just the fruit of the vine and the taste of victory. I poured the cider for Amara and handed her the glass. She took it with both hands, feeling grown up and important. I walked back to the edge of the boat, looking out at the water that stretched endlessly before us. The horizon was wide open. The storm had passed and the ship was still afloat. I raised my glass toward the fading sun, toward the city that had watched me fall and rise again, and toward the prison cell where my ex-husband was currently learning the true meaning of powerlessness. To family, Amara said, clinking her glass against mine. I looked at her and then out at the world we had conquered. To family, I agreed. And to the ones who underestimated us. I took a long, slow sip of the wine, savoring the complexity on my tongue. The wind picked up, carrying the yacht forward into the open ocean. I did not look back at the shore. I simply smiled as the sun dipped below the waterline, leaving us in the peaceful, beautiful dark. The sun was beginning to set over the Atlantic, casting a warm, golden glow across the deck of the Legacy. It was the first time in 2 years that my father's yacht had left the marina. For a long time it had sat dry, docked, a symbol of a life I was too busy or too broken to live. But today it cut through the waves with a smooth, powerful rhythm that matched the beating of my own heart. I stood at the railing wearing a white linen dress that fluttered in the sea breeze. My cane was leaning against a deck chair behind me, but I did not need it. The salt air filled my lungs, clearing out the last lingering memories of the stale sick room where I had been held prisoner. I took a deep breath. It tasted like freedom. "Look," Mommy, Amara called out, running to my side. Her natural curls were bouncing in the wind, free and wild, just like her spirit. She pointed toward the coastline where the industrial silhouette of the Southside harbor rose against the orange sky. I followed her finger. From this distance, the cranes looked like toy machines moving containers that held millions of dollars in goods. The land was bustling, alive and thriving. It was the land Kendrick had tried to sell for pennies, the land Jessica had tried to spend on a European vacation, but there it stood, solid and immovable, firmly anchored in the Amara Brooks irrevocable trust. "It looks busy today," Amara said, resting her chin on the railing. "It is busy, baby," I replied, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "And it is going to stay busy. That is your future right there. No one can ever take that away from you. Not a bank, not a husband, no one." Amara looked up at me, her eyes bright with a wisdom that exceeded her years. "We beat them, didn't we, Mommy? The bad people." I smiled down at her. "Yes, we did. We beat them because they made the biggest mistake a predator can make. They forgot that the prey might have teeth." I turned to the small table set up on the aft deck. There was a bottle of vintage Bordeaux breathing in the sea air and a bottle of sparkling apple cider. I picked up the wine bottle. My hand was steady. There was no tremor, no hesitation. I poured the deep red liquid into a crystal glass, watching it swirl. It was clear. It was pure. There was no yellow powder, no sediment, just the fruit of the vine and the taste of victory. I poured the cider for Amara and handed her the glass. She took it with both hands, feeling grown up and important. I walked back to the edge of the boat, looking out at the water that stretched endlessly before us. The horizon was wide open. The storm had passed and the ship was still afloat. I raised my glass toward the fading sun, toward the city that had watched me fall and rise again, and toward the prison cell where my ex-husband was currently learning the true meaning of powerlessness. "To family," Amara said, clinking her glass against mine. I looked at her and then out at the world we had conquered. "To family," I agreed. "And to the ones who underestimated us." I took a long, slow sip of the wine, savoring the complexity on my tongue. The wind picked up, carrying the yacht forward into the open ocean. I did not look back at the shore. I simply smiled as the sun dipped below the waterline, leaving us in the peaceful, beautiful dark. The story of Dominique Brooks serves as a chilling yet empowering reminder that silence should never be mistaken for weakness. Kendrick and Jessica made the fatal error of assuming that because Dominique was physically vulnerable, she was mentally defeated. They underestimated the resilience of a woman who built her own empire and the sharp intelligence of a child who was watching from the shadows. The most profound lesson here is the vital importance of trusting your instincts and protecting your legacy. Dominique's foresight to secure her assets in a trust fund long before the betrayal was revealed proved that true power lies in preparation, not just reaction. Furthermore, the narrative highlights that abusers often hide behind the masks of those we trust most, using isolation as a weapon. However, the truth has a way of surfacing often through the most unexpected allies, like little Amara. In the end, justice is not given. It is claimed by those brave enough to stand up when the world expects them to stay down. If this story of justice and resilience kept you on the edge of your seat, please hit the like button and subscribe for more gripping tales. What would you have done in Dominique's shoes? Let us know in the comments below.